Daniel Harrison's vision blurred as he lay in the hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors fading into background noise. At 73, his body had finally given up after years of devotion to a woman who never truly loved him back. His wife, Catherine, sat in the corner of the room, her face as expressionless as it had been throughout their 40-year marriage. "Daniel," she said flatly, barely looking up from her phone. "The doctor says it won't be long now." He wanted to laugh at the irony. Even at his deathbed, she couldn't muster genuine emotion. His breathing grew shallow as memories flooded his mind, every cold rejection, every dismissive comment, every time he'd poured his heart out only to be met with indifference. He remembered their wedding night, when she'd turned away from him claiming exhaustion. He remembered their anniversary dinners where she'd checked her watch repeatedly, eager to leave. He remembered the countless times he'd told her he loved her, only to receive a mechanical "you too" in response. The worst memory came last. Just 2 weeks ago, while Catherine thought he was sleeping in his hospital bed, his nurse had accidentally knocked over Catherine's purse. Letters had spilled out, decades worth of yellowed envelopes bound with a red ribbon. The nurse had apologized profusely while gathering them, but Daniel had seen enough. Letters addressed to Marcus Webb, written in Catherine's distinctive handwriting, dated throughout their entire marriage. When Catherine had left that evening, Daniel had asked the nurse to bring him the letters. His hands had trembled as he read through them, passionate declarations of love, regrets about choosing security over happiness, fantasies about running away together. Every letter ended the same way: "Always yours, even though I can never truly be." C. Marcus Webb. His former college friend. The men who'd been in their wedding party. The men who'd moved to Europe shortly after the ceremony, supposedly for a job opportunity. The men Catherine had loved all along. Daniel had confronted her the next day. Catherine had barely reacted, her expression remaining neutral as she confirmed what the letters revealed. "It was 40 years ago, Daniel. What does it matter now?" she'd said, as if his entire life hadn't been built on a foundation of lies. As darkness claimed him, his final thought wasn't of love or regret. It was a question: why did I waste my entire life on someone who never cared? Then, suddenly, there was light. Daniel gasped and sat up, his hands instinctively clutching at his chest. But instead of the frail, wrinkled skin he expected, he felt firm muscle. He looked down at his hands, young, strong, unmarked by age spots or arthritis. His heart pounded with a vigor he hadn't felt in decades. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice deeper and more resonant than the raspy croak it had become in his final years. He stumbled out of bed and caught sight of himself in the full-length mirror across the room. Staring back at him was his 30-year-old self, tall, broad-shouldered, with thick dark hair and the sharp features that Catherine had once claimed attracted her. But he knew the truth now. In his previous life, she'd married him for his money and status, nothing more. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands and checked the date, March 15, 2015. 43 years in the past. He'd been given a second chance, returned to the exact moment when his company, Harrison Technologies, was on the verge of its breakthrough deal. More importantly, it was 3 months before he'd proposed to Catherine. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his mind racing. He remembered this day clearly from his first life. He'd woken up anxious about the investor meeting scheduled for that afternoon, a meeting that would secure $5 million in funding and launch Harrison Technologies from a promising startup to a serious player in the software industry. In his previous life, he'd spent the morning rehearsing his pitch, triple-checking his presentation, and trying to manage his nerves. But he also remembered what had happened that evening. Catherine had shown up at his apartment unexpected, claiming she'd heard about his meeting through mutual friends and wanted to celebrate with him. She'd been warm, affectionate, interested in ways she'd never been during their previous casual dates. That night marked the turning point in their relationship, the moment when she'd decided he was worth pursuing seriously. Looking back with the clarity of his future knowledge, Daniel could see the calculation in every move she'd made. Before that meeting, when Harrison Technologies was just another struggling tech startup, Catherine had been distant and noncommittal. They'd been on perhaps 5 or 6 dates over 2 months, always at her convenience, always ending with her making excuses to leave early. She'd never invited him to meet her friends or family. She'd never stayed the night. She'd treated him like an option, not a priority. But after the funding announcement hit the tech news sites, everything changed. Suddenly she had time for him. Suddenly she wanted to know everything about his business. Suddenly she was talking about introducing him to her parents and discussing future plans. He'd been so thrilled by her attention that he'd ignored the obvious pattern. Never again, Daniel muttered, his reflections eyes hardening with resolve. His phone buzzed again. A text from Catherine. Danny, are you still coming to dinner tonight? My parents are excited to meet you properly. Don't be late. XO. The casual nickname, the false affection, the manufactured warmth, it all disgusted him now. In his previous life, he'd been so desperate for her approval that he'd cancelled his celebration with his development team to attend that dinner. He'd met her parents, stern Mr. Whitmore and his social climbing wife, and endured an evening of subtle interrogation about his finances, prospects, and family background. They'd approved of him not because of who he was, but because of what he could provide for their daughter. Daniel deleted the message without responding. He went through his morning routine mechanically, his mind working through the implications of this second chance. If he was truly back in 2015, he had 43 years of knowledge about technology trends, market movements, and business opportunities. He knew which companies would rise and fall. He knew which investments would pay off and which would crash. He knew which partnerships to pursue and which to avoid. More importantly, he knew the cost of sacrificing his ambition and self-respect for someone who would never appreciate it. The investor meeting went even better than he remembered. With the confidence of someone who'd already lived through this moment once, Daniel presented his vision with absolute certainty. The investors didn't just agree to the $5 million, they increased it to $7 million and offered better terms than in his previous timeline. His development team celebrated that night at their favorite bar near the office. Daniel stayed until midnight, buying rounds and genuinely enjoying the camaraderie of people who'd believed in his vision from the beginning. In his first life, he'd skipped this celebration for Catherine's family dinner. This time, he chose the people who'd actually stood by him. His phone buzzed constantly throughout the evening, Catherine calling repeatedly, then texting increasingly frantic messages wondering where he was and why he'd stood up her parents. Daniel silenced his phone and ordered another round for his team. Over the next few days, Catherine's attempts to reach him intensified. She left voicemails that progressed from concerned to confused to irritated. She sent texts asking if something was wrong, if she'd done something to upset him. She even showed up at his office twice, but his secretary, a sharp woman named Margaret who'd never liked Catherine, turned her away both times. Mr. Harrison is in important meetings, Margaret told her firmly. I'll let him know you stopped by. Daniel made sure Margaret understood that Catherine's calls were no longer to be put through and her visits were no longer welcome. Margaret, who'd witnessed Catherine's cold treatment of Daniel in his previous life during the early years of their marriage when she'd worked as his executive assistant, seemed almost pleased to enforce these boundaries. About time, Margaret muttered after Catherine's second visit. That woman treated you like an inconvenience even when you bent over backward for her. Daniel blinked. You noticed that? Mr. Harrison, I've worked for you for 3 years. Of course I noticed. She barely looked at you before the funding came through. Then suddenly she was hanging on your every word. Some of us have eyes. Margaret adjusted her glasses pointedly. A man like you deserves someone who appreciates him for who he is, not what he has. In his previous timeline, Margaret had left Harrison Technologies shortly after his marriage to Catherine, claiming she'd received a better offer elsewhere. Daniel now realized she'd probably left because she couldn't stand watching Catherine manipulate him. This time, he made a mental note to give Margaret a significant raise and more responsibility. Loyalty like hers was rare. 3 weeks after his return, Catherine finally cornered him. She bypassed Margaret while the secretary was away from her desk and walked straight into Daniel's office. He looked up from his computer to find her standing in the doorway, dressed in a designer outfit he knew cost more than his developer's monthly salary. Daniel, what's going on? Her voice carried frustration barely concealed beneath concern. You've been avoiding me for 3 weeks. Did I do something wrong? He studied her for a long moment. Catherine was objectively beautiful, blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, striking blue eyes, high cheekbones, and a figure she maintained religiously. In his first life, her beauty had blinded him to her coldness. Now, looking at her with decades of painful experience, he saw only the calculated expression beneath the practiced concern. Nothing's wrong, Catherine, he said evenly, returning his attention to the screen. I've been busy. Too busy for me. Her voice carried that edge of indignation he remembered so well. Daniel, we had plans. My parents have been asking about you. I've been telling everyone we're serious, and you're making me look like a fool. I don't recall agreeing to be serious with anyone, he replied, not looking at her. We've been on a few dates. That's all. Her perfectly painted lips parted in shock. A few dates. Daniel, we've been together for 8 months. We've talked about a future together. 8 months. In his previous life, those 8 months had been him pursuing her while she remained noncommittal and distant. She'd cancelled on him repeatedly, always with last-minute excuses. She'd never introduced him to her friends despite meeting his entire social circle. She'd never stayed overnight at his apartment, always claiming she had early morning obligations. She'd treated their relationship as something she was evaluating rather than participating in. Until the money came. You've talked about a future together, he corrected, finally meeting her gaze. The coldness in his eyes made her take a step back. I've been listening. There's a difference. What's gotten into you? Catherine's shock was giving way to anger, the real emotion beneath her carefully constructed facade. 3 weeks ago, you were talking about meeting my parents properly, about taking the next step. Now you're acting like I'm some random woman who wandered into your office. In his previous life, he'd proposed to her 6 months from now. They'd married quickly, she'd insisted on a short engagement, claiming she didn't want to wait. Their wedding had been expensive and elaborate, paid for entirely by Daniel despite Mr. Whitmore's promises to contribute. Catherine had invited 300 guests while Daniel's list had barely reached 50. It should have been a warning sign. Their honeymoon in Bali had been disappointing. Catherine had spent most of it on her phone or reading by the pool, showing little interest in the romantic excursions Daniel had planned. When he'd tried to talk to her about it, she'd accused him of being too demanding and needy. He'd apologized and tried to give her space. That pattern had defined their entire marriage. Daniel pursuing connection, Catherine withdrawing. Daniel trying to understand what she needed, Catherine remaining perpetually dissatisfied. Daniel working harder to make her happy, Catherine growing colder with each passing year. He'd assumed it was his fault. That if he just tried harder, earned more, gave more, she'd eventually love him the way he loved her. It had taken 40 years and a deathbed discovery to realize that she'd been in love with someone else the entire time. Daniel stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate slowness. Catherine, I think it's best if we both move on. You're looking for something I can't provide, and I have priorities that don't align with what you want. It's better to end this now before either of us invests more time in something that won't work. Won't work. Her voice rose, genuine distress breaking through her composure. Daniel, I love you. How can you just throw that away? The words he'd longed to hear throughout his entire previous marriage, now rang hollow. She'd never said them in his first life until after the wedding, and even then they'd been rare and mechanical. He knew the truth. She didn't love him. She loved what he represented, security, status, a comfortable life. She loved the idea of being Mrs. Harrison, wife of a successful CEO. But she didn't love Daniel. I wish you the best, Catherine, he said, walking past her toward the door. My secretary will show you out. He left her standing in his office, her carefully controlled mask finally cracking to reveal the fury beneath. As he walked down the hallway, he heard her shout after him, "You're going to regret this, Daniel. You'll realize what you gave up." But he already knew what he'd given up in his first life. He'd given up his ambition, his self-respect, his peace of mind, and 40 years of his existence. This time, he was choosing differently. Margaret appeared at his side as Catherine stormed past toward the elevators. Are you all right, Mr. Harrison? Better than I've been in a long time, Margaret. Actually, can you schedule a meeting with the leadership team for tomorrow morning? I want to discuss our expansion strategy. I have some ideas about directions we should pursue. Over the following weeks, Daniel threw himself into transforming Harrison Technologies. Without Catherine's constant demands on his time and emotional energy, he worked with a focus and clarity he'd never possessed in his first life. He remembered which technologies would become essential, which markets would explode, which talent would prove invaluable. He hired a brilliant young developer named Sophie Chen who'd impressed him at a tech conference. In his previous timeline, he passed on hiring her because Catherine had complained about him spending too much time at work and not enough time with her. Sophie went on to become a leading figure in AI development at a competitor company. This time, Daniel made sure she joined Harrison Technologies, offering her equity and creative freedom. He also reached out to James Rodriguez, a marketing genius who'd approached Harrison Technologies with partnership ideas in his first life. Catherine had been jealous of the time Daniel spent with James developing strategies, calling it boys' club nonsense, and demanding Daniel spend evenings with her instead. The partnership had fallen apart, and James had taken his talents elsewhere, building a successful marketing firm. This time, Daniel pursued the partnership aggressively, and James brought his entire team into the Harrison Technologies family. With Sophie's technical innovations and James's marketing brilliance, Harrison Technologies began launching products that captured significant market share. Daniel's knowledge of future trends allowed him to position the company ahead of competitors who wouldn't see these opportunities for years. His personal life remained deliberately empty of romance. He dated occasionally, coffee with a woman he met at a business conference, dinner with someone his friend introduced him to, but he kept things casual and made his intentions clear from the start. He wasn't interested in anything serious. He'd learned that lesson too well. His friends noticed the change in him. Robert Chen, his college roommate and still his closest friend, confronted him one evening over drinks. "Dude, what happened with Catherine? You were crazy about her for months, then suddenly nothing. She's been calling me asking what went wrong." Daniel took a long sip of his whiskey. "She has your number. She got it from Jessica." Robert's girlfriend, Jessica, had been friendly with Catherine in his previous timeline. "She seems genuinely upset. Says you just cut her off without explanation." There wasn't much to explain. "We wanted different things." Daniel signaled the bartender for another round. "Robert, did you ever like Catherine? Honestly." Robert hesitated, then shook his head. "Not really. She always seemed cold. Like she was evaluating you instead of dating you. Jessica didn't like her either, said she gave off weird vibes. But you seemed happy, so we supported it." "I wasn't happy. I was desperate for her approval." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes we confuse wanting someone to want us with actually wanting them. I was doing that with Catherine." That's surprisingly insightful for someone who usually avoids emotional conversations. Robert studied him. "You seem different lately. More focused. More. I don't know, present. I realized life's too short to waste on people who don't value you," Daniel said simply. "I'd rather build something meaningful than chase someone who's always going to be looking elsewhere." 3 months after cutting Catherine off, Daniel's company hit a major milestone. Harrison Technologies secured a contract with a major financial institution to develop proprietary trading software. The deal was worth $50 million, the largest contract in the company's history. In his previous timeline, this had happened too, but Daniel had been so distracted by Catherine's demands and his attempts to save their deteriorating marriage that he'd made strategic mistakes, and the project had come in over budget and behind schedule. This time, with his full attention on the work, Daniel delivered ahead of schedule and under budget. The success attracted attention from venture capital firms and industry leaders. Offers for acquisition started coming in, but Daniel turned them all down. He remembered which companies would thrive and which would fail over the next decade. Harrison Technologies was going to be a thriving company. The celebration party at a downtown hotel drew hundreds of attendees, clients, investors, employees, industry press. Daniel worked the room confidently, his decades of business experience giving him an ease with networking that his 30-year-old self hadn't possessed in the first timeline. That's when he saw them. Catherine and Marcus Webb stood near the bar, clearly together. Marcus looked the same as Daniel remembered, tall and lean with an artistic air, wearing a blazer over a graphic t-shirt like a man who'd never quite left college behind. Catherine was animated in a way Daniel had rarely seen during their relationship, her face bright with genuine laughter at something Marcus said. Daniel's chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Here was proof of what he'd suspected throughout his entire first marriage. When Catherine was with someone she actually wanted, her coldness melted away. She was capable of warmth and affection. She just hadn't been capable of it with him. Marcus noticed Daniel first and waved. To Daniel's surprise, they walked over together. Daniel. Marcus's greeting was friendly, without any hint of awkwardness. Man, I heard you're absolutely crushing it. This contract is huge. Congratulations. Thanks, Marcus. I didn't know you were back in town. Daniel shook his hand, his expression neutral. Got back about 2 months ago. Art scene in Europe wasn't what I hoped, so I came home to regroup. Marcus glanced at Catherine, who was watching Daniel with an unreadable expression. I ran into Catherine at a gallery opening. Turns out you two used to date. Briefly, Daniel said. Didn't work out. Catherine's jaw tightened. We were together for 8 months, Daniel. That's not exactly brief. Perspective, I guess. Daniel's tone remained polite but distant. 8 months where we barely saw each other doesn't feel long in retrospect. That's not fair, Catherine said, her voice rising slightly. I was always available when you wanted to spend time together. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I remember cancellations, rescheduled dates, and a lot of excuses about being too busy. But it's ancient history now. Water under the bridge. Marcus looked between them, clearly sensing tension he hadn't anticipated. Well, like you said, ancient history. Catherine and I are just reconnecting as old friends right now anyway. Just friends for now, Catherine corrected, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. We'll see where it goes. Daniel understood the subtext. She was trying to make him jealous, trying to provoke a reaction. In his first life, seeing her with another man would have devastated him. Now, knowing what he knew, it felt like watching a play where he already knew the ending. I hope it works out for both of you, Daniel said sincerely. Marcus, good seeing you again. Catherine, take care of yourself. He walked away before either could respond, heading toward a group of investors who'd been trying to get his attention. As he engaged in conversation about Harrison Technologies' future plans, he noticed Catherine watching him from across the room, her expression troubled. The following weeks brought more changes. Sophie Chen's AI development team made a breakthrough that positioned Harrison Technologies at the forefront of machine learning applications. James Rodriguez's marketing campaigns went viral, turning the company into a recognizable brand beyond just industry circles. Daniel's wealth grew exponentially, but more importantly, his reputation as a visionary leader solidified. He also started receiving more attention from women, models at charity galas, entrepreneurs at tech conferences, even celebrities through mutual connections. Daniel was polite but distant with all of them. He'd learned that attraction based on success and wealth was just as hollow as Catherine's had been. The women who showed interest now reminded him too much of her, seeing dollar signs instead of the person underneath. His mother called one Sunday afternoon, her voice concerned. Daniel, sweetheart, I've been hearing rumors. People say you're not dating anyone, that you're working yourself to exhaustion. Are you all right? In his previous life, his mother had adored Catherine at first, charmed by her beauty and social grace. But over the years, she'd grown concerned about how withdrawn Daniel had become, how Catherine seemed to drain his vitality. His mother had never said anything directly, but Daniel had caught her worried looks whenever Catherine was particularly cold or dismissive. I'm fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. The company's doing incredibly well. I'm not asking about the company, Daniel. I'm asking about you. You're 30 years old. Don't you want companionship? Love? A family someday? Daniel looked out his apartment window at the city skyline. Maybe eventually. Right now, I'm focused on building something lasting. Something I can be proud of. Your father and I are proud of you regardless of your bank balance, his mother said gently. But pride isn't the same as happiness. Don't forget to build a life, not just a business. I know, Mom. I promise I'm not sacrificing my happiness. I'm actually happier now than I've been in years. It was true. The constant anxiety from his first life, the desperate need for Catherine's approval, the confusion about why nothing he did was ever enough, the grinding sense of inadequacy, was gone. He woke up each morning energized and purposeful rather than dreading another day of emotional rejection. 6 months after his return, Harrison Technologies went public. The IPO was one of the most successful tech offerings of the year, making Daniel a billionaire at 31. His face appeared on magazine covers. Business schools invited him to speak. Competitors tried to poach his talent with outrageous offers. Through it all, Daniel remained grounded and focused. He remembered the mistakes he'd made in his first life, expanding too quickly in some areas, too slowly in others. He knew which acquisitions to pursue and which to avoid. He built Harrison Technologies methodically and strategically, creating something that would last. His personal life remained deliberately uncomplicated. He bought a penthouse with a view of the city, but he kept it simple rather than filling it with the ostentatious displays of wealth Catherine had demanded in their first life. He donated generously to causes he believed in, anonymously when possible. He maintained close friendships with people who'd known him before his success. Robert and Jessica got engaged, and Robert asked Daniel to be his best man. At the bachelor party, after most of the guests had left, Robert brought up the subject Daniel had been avoiding. Jessica ran into Catherine last week. She's engaged to Marcus Webb. Daniel nodded, unsurprised. Good for them. You really don't care? Robert looked skeptical. You were crazy about her not that long ago. I was crazy about who I wanted her to be, Daniel corrected. That's different from actually caring about who she was. Looking back, I don't think I really knew Catherine at all. I knew the version of her I'd constructed in my head. Jessica says Catherine asks about you sometimes. Apparently, she follows all your press coverage. Robert paused. Jessica thinks she regrets how things ended. Maybe she does. But regret doesn't change anything. She made her choice, and I made mine. We're both living with the consequences. The wedding was beautiful. During his toast, Daniel spoke about love built on friendship, respect, and genuine partnership, all the things his marriage to Catherine had lacked. He saw several single women at the reception eyeing him speculatively, but he left early, claiming an important meeting the next morning. Years passed. Harrison Technologies continued its meteoric rise, acquiring smaller companies and launching innovative products. Daniel built a reputation not just for business acumen but for treating employees fairly and fostering workplace culture where people thrived. He created profit-sharing programs that made many of his early employees wealthy. He established mentorship initiatives to help young entrepreneurs. The tech industry dubbed him the philosopher CEO because of his unusual approach to business, prioritizing sustainable growth over maximum profit, employee well-being over shareholder returns, long-term vision over quarterly results. In interviews, he spoke about the importance of building something meaningful rather than just accumulating wealth. Money is a tool, not a goal, he told a reporter from Fortune magazine. The goal is to create value, to solve problems, to make the world slightly better than you found it. The money follows naturally when you focus on those things. The article went viral, shared millions of times across social media. Daniel received speaking invitations from universities, conferences, and even a TED Talk offer. He accepted some, declined others, always weighing whether the exposure would actually serve his mission or just his ego. He also started receiving different kinds of attention from women. Instead of the social climbers and gold diggers attracted to his wealth, he met entrepreneurs seeking advice, engineers passionate about technology, artists who'd read his interviews and connected with his philosophy. These interactions felt different, based on genuine connection rather than calculation. He went on dates occasionally. Coffee with a brilliant engineer who developed an elegant solution to a persistent coding problem. Dinner with a nonprofit director who shared his passion for education reform. A museum visit with an art curator who made him see familiar paintings in entirely new ways. But he never let things progress beyond friendship. The wound from his first life, 40 years of emotional deprivation, had left him cautious about romance. His friends worried. You can't let one bad relationship make you give up on love entirely, Jessica told him at a dinner party. Not all women are like Catherine. I know that intellectually, Daniel replied. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Right now, I'm content with how my life is. Maybe that'll change eventually. 10 years after his return, at 40 in his new timeline but carrying the memories of 73 years lived, Harrison Technologies celebrated its 15th anniversary. The company had grown from a small startup to a major corporation with offices in 12 countries and over 5,000 employees. Daniel had achieved everything he'd failed to accomplish in his first life, and more. The anniversary gala was held at the city's most prestigious venue. Current employees, former employees, investors, clients, and industry leaders filled the ballroom. Daniel gave a speech thanking everyone who'd contributed to the company's success, particularly mentioning Margaret, Sophie, and James by name. Success isn't built by individuals, he said. It's built by teams of people who share a vision and support each other in achieving it. Harrison Technology succeeded because I was fortunate enough to surround myself with brilliant, dedicated people who believed in what we were building. After the formal program ended, Daniel circulated through the crowd, personally thanking key contributors and catching up with people he hadn't seen in years. That's when he noticed a familiar face near the back of the room. Catherine stood alone by the bar, looking older and somehow diminished in a simple black dress. Her blonde hair was shorter now, her face showing lines that professional makeup couldn't quite conceal. She watched Daniel with an expression of such profound sadness that it almost made him feel sorry for her. Almost. He considered ignoring her, simply continuing his circulation and letting her remain a ghost from his past. But something, curiosity, or perhaps a desire for closure, made him walk over. Catherine. I didn't expect to see you here. She turned, and he saw that her eyes were rimmed with red as if she'd been crying. I shouldn't have come. I know that. But I saw the invitation on Marcus's desk. He does contract work for one of your subsidiaries, and I needed to see you. Why? To apologize. Truly apologize. She took a shaky breath. I've spent years watching your success from a distance, reading about your accomplishments, seeing what you've built. And I realized what I gave up. What I threw away. Daniel signaled the bartender for 2 waters, handing her one. What happened with Marcus? We got married. It lasted 5 years. Catherine laughed bitterly. Turns out love and passion aren't enough when you can barely pay rent. He couldn't support us with his art, and I'd never really built a career because I'd always assumed I'd marry well. The resentment grew. We fought constantly. Eventually, he met someone else, a gallery owner who could actually help his career. They're married now. Have a child. I'm sorry. Don't be. I got what I deserved. She looked at him directly. I was horrible to you, Daniel. Cold, calculating, manipulative. I pursued you when I learned about your company's value, but I never actually cared about you as a person. I was in love with Marcus the whole time, but I chose security over love. And in doing so, I lost both. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved better. Because I saw your interview last month, the one where they asked about your success secrets and you said choosing yourself was the best decision you ever made. I realized you were talking about leaving me. Daniel didn't confirm or deny it, just waited for her to continue. I watched you build an empire on your own terms. I watched you treat your employees like family. I watched you become exactly the kind of man I should have appreciated when I had the chance. And I thought about how different my life might have been if I'd actually loved you the way you loved me. Past tense, Daniel said quietly. I loved who I thought you were. I was in love with potential, with hope, with the idea that if I just tried hard enough, you'd care about me the way I cared about you. But that's not love. That's desperation. You're right. She was crying now, tears running down her carefully made-up face. I hope you find someone someday who deserves you. Someone who sees your value from the beginning, not just when you become successful. Daniel considered his response carefully. A part of him, the part that still carried wounds from his first life, wanted to be cruel, to twist the knife and make her feel a fraction of the pain he'd endured. But he'd spent 10 years building a different version of himself, one focused on creating rather than destroying. Catherine, I appreciate the apology. Genuinely. But that life, the one where we were together, that wasn't the life I was meant to live. If you'd actually loved me, if we'd married, I wouldn't have become the person I am now. I needed to choose myself, to prioritize my own growth and goals. Your coldness, paradoxically, set me free to do that. So I actually did you a favor by being terrible to you. She laughed through her tears. That's a generous interpretation. Not generous. Just accurate. We teach each other lessons, Catherine. You taught me that my value isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. That chasing someone's approval is a waste of the energy I could spend building something meaningful. That self-respect matters more than romantic validation. Those are hard lessons. The important ones usually are. Daniel finished his water and set the glass down. I hope you find peace, Catherine. I hope you build a life you're proud of. But that life and mine, they're separate now. They have to be. I know. She wiped her eyes, smearing mascara. Thank you for talking to me. For not being cruel when you had every right to be. Cruelty takes energy. I'd rather spend that energy on the people who matter to me now. He walked away, leaving her at the bar. As he rejoined the celebration, he felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying without realizing it had finally lifted. The ghost of his first life had been exorcised. Catherine was just a person now, not a symbol of his failures or regrets. Margaret found him near the end of the evening. That was gracious of you, talking to her. I saw her come in and almost had security escort her out, but then I saw you walk over. Sometimes closure is necessary, Daniel said. For both parties. Are you all right, Mr. Harrison? Better than all right, Margaret. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The following months brought new opportunities. Harrison Technologies partnered with a major university to establish a research center for emerging technologies. Daniel personally funded scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing engineering degrees. He launched initiatives to address the tech industry's diversity problems, creating pathways for women and minorities who traditionally faced barriers to entry. His mother called to tell him his father had tears in his eyes while reading an article about Daniel's philanthropic work. He said he's prouder of you for this than all the money you've made. And so am I, sweetheart. On his 42nd birthday, but with the memories of 75 years lived, Daniel sat on his penthouse terrace watching the sunset. He'd accomplished more in this second chance than he'd ever imagined possible. He'd built a company that mattered, created jobs, advanced technology, and helped countless people along the way. More importantly, he'd built a life on his own terms. No desperate attempts to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. No sacrificing his ambitions for someone else's comfort. No settling for scraps of affection when he deserved genuine partnership. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Daniel Harrison. Mr. Harrison, this is Elena Rodriguez from the Global Technology Summit. We'd like you to be our keynote speaker at next year's conference in Singapore. The theme is Leadership for Tomorrow, and we feel your approach to business and personal success perfectly embodies what we're trying to highlight. Daniel smiled. In his first life, he'd never received invitations like this. Catherine had wanted him successful enough to provide for her lifestyle, but not so successful that it took time away from her. She'd resented his ambition, seen it as competition for his attention rather than an integral part of who he was. I'd be honored, he said. Send the details to my assistant, and we'll work it out. After hanging up, Daniel remained on the terrace, thinking about the journey he'd taken. The old man dying in a hospital bed seemed like a character from someone else's story now. That Daniel had wasted his life chasing approval from someone who would never give it. This Daniel had chosen a different path. He'd chosen himself. And it had made all the difference. Below him, the city lights flickered to life as darkness fell. Somewhere down there, Catherine was living whatever life she'd managed to build from the ruins of her choices. Somewhere, Marcus was with his new family. Somewhere, countless other people were making decisions that would shape their futures. Daniel had made his decisions. He'd lived his second chance with intention and purpose. He'd built something lasting, something meaningful, something true to who he actually was rather than who someone else wanted him to be. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he was genuinely, completely content. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Jessica and I are expecting. You're going to be Uncle Daniel. Hope you're ready for diaper duty. Daniel laughed and typed back his congratulations. This was the life he'd chosen, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him, building something that would outlast him, living authentically rather than desperately. He'd been given a second chance, and he'd used it not to chase a different romantic outcome, but to chase himself. To discover who he could become when he wasn't distorting himself to fit someone else's vision. To build a legacy based on his values rather than someone else's approval. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Daniel watched it with the peaceful certainty of someone who'd finally found his way home.